During the summer of 1912, the Dunbar family took a trip, as they often did, to Swayze Lake, Louisiana. As the head of the household, Percy Dunbar worked hard in the insurance business, so these vacations with his wife and two young sons were invaluable, giving the family time to relax and spend quality time together. However, every parent's worst nightmare was about to come true and shatter that tranquility forever, when their 4-year-old son Bobby disappeared from the idyllic spot without a trace, sparking a massive nationwide search that ended in the strangest way imaginable. Welcome to Bad Things. In this episode, we will look at one of the strangest disappearances of all time, that of 4-year-old Bobby Dunbar, and explore the timeline, the theories of what could have happened, and what most likely happened to this cherubic little boy. On June 19, 1907, Clarence Percy Dunbar, known as Percy, married his sweetheart Lelia Celeste Whitley, known as Leslie, at the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church in Washington, Louisiana. Percy worked hard as part owner of Vestorge and Dunbar Insurance Agency, situated in Opelousas, Louisiana, and his marriage to Leslie marked the start of what they hoped would be a wonderful family life together. It seemed that their wishes were coming true when just under 1 year later, on May 23, 1908, their son, Robert Clarence Dunbar, or Bobby as he was known, was born. Truly a honeymoon baby, Bobby was the apple of his parents' eyes. 2 years later, Alonzo was born, and the family was complete. While life was happy in the sunshine yellow house that the family shared, they would take every opportunity to escape everyday life and often spent time at Swayze Lake, some 25 miles away from Opelousas. The lake was a favorite haunt with the Dunbar family, and they would often go with family and friends to unwind and fish, and generally enjoy some peace away from the hustle and bustle of work and home. The children would enjoy their time on vacation too, and would spend hours fishing with the adults, or simply playing by the water. In August 1912, the Dunbars, along with some extended family and friends, headed to Swayze Lake again. Work was never far away though, and on the morning of Friday, August 23rd, Percy waved goodbye to his family and headed off to meet with colleagues to work on a business project before doing a spot of fishing. According to some reports, Bobby was not happy that his father was taking off and leaving his family behind, and had a massive tantrum, during which he broke a straw hat in temper. A family friend named Paul Mitzi, who had no children of his own but was well liked by the other adults and children in the group, decided to distract little Bobby and took him and some of his young cousins for a ramble along the shore. Paul allegedly had an easy relationship with the oldest Dunbar boy and would often call him by the name Heavy, because although the 4-year-old wasn't fat, he was a robust child, and Paul would joke that he couldn't carry little Bobby because he was indeed too heavy. Time passed, and when it was time for lunch, Leslie called out for the wanderers to come and wash up ready for some food. Paul returned along with the children who had accompanied him. All except one, little Bobby Dunbar. Thinking that her son had simply wandered off, Leslie called his name, getting louder and louder as the minutes passed. With no sign of her son, though, Leslie began to panic, and the search widened, with other people in the surrounding area joining in. When Percy Dunbar returned from his work meeting, he was met with hysterics from his wife. Despite searching and calling, nobody had been able to locate the 4-year-old, and the possibility that their son was really missing began to sink in. As more and more people joined in, the search was widened even more. Alligators, which were a regular feature of life at the lake, were captured, killed, and opened up in a bid to find the child's remains. But despite several animals losing their lives, no human remains were found. Small footprints were discovered leading away from where the Dunbar family was staying, but in a spot as popular as Swayze Lake, the prints could have belonged to any number of children. The party even used dynamite to blast through the lake and dredge the bottom of the water in a bid to locate the body. As day turned to night, the search was postponed, but when daylight came again, divers searched coves and clumps of weed underwater in case his body had become trapped. The search continued for several days, but Bobby was nowhere to be seen. Reports of a strange man sitting in a boat on the lake filtered through, but again, nobody knew whether he was related to the disappearance or simply a man enjoying some time on the water. Leslie became seriously ill with the stress of her missing son and returned home to Opelousas with most of her family, while Paul Mitzi remained with some other men to continue their fruitless search. With no body and no signs of an animal attack, the idea that Bobby had been abducted was touted. Reward. Desperate for news of their son, the Dunbars put up a reward of $1,000, worth more than $32,000 today, for information on little Bobby. The Dunbars were a well-respected and well-liked family, and the local community raised another $5,000, bringing the total reward to $6,000, which would be the equivalent of around $200,000 today. The search extended to New Orleans, around 130 miles away, and Percy Dunbar himself visited New Orleans to circulate a photo and description of his missing son. Months passed, and with no news, the family began to admit defeat and accept that Bobby had probably drowned or been eaten by an alligator. Having exhausted all avenues, they decided to give the $5,000 back to the community and call off the search. The ladies of Hub. Just when all hope had been extinguished, in April of 1913, 8 months after his disappearance, possible news of Bobby's whereabouts came to light. A letter was received from the ladies of Hub, a group of women who lived in a small town called Hub, almost 200 miles away. In the letter, they claimed to have found a boy who matched Bobby's description in the company of a man called William Cantwell Walters, a traveling peddler who specialized in repairing pianos and organs. The Ladies' Collective had witnessed the man whipping the little boy and had secured a citizen's arrest, allowing them to detain Walters and examine the child with him. Walters claimed that the boy was, in fact, a child named Charles Bruce Anderson, aka Bruce, and that he had permission from the boy's mother, Julie Anderson, to be with him. According to Walters, Bruce was the illegitimate son of his own brother and Julia, who had been working as a field hand and carer to his own elderly parents. William Walters was arrested for kidnapping, and the Dunbars were summoned to New Orleans so they could identify and be reunited with their son. Scar. Identification should have been easy. When Bobby Dunbar was younger, he had received a burn which had resulted in a scar on the big toe of his left foot. The Dunbars, having seen photos of the boy, traveled to New Orleans to see for themselves if this was the son they had so desperately been missing. Certainly, the boy had a scar on his foot and a mole on his neck, which matched that of Bobby, but when the child came face to face with Percy and Leslie, it was not the reunion that the bereft parents had hoped for. Indeed, there was no recognition on his part, and he even shied away when his mother tried to cuddle him. For her part, Leslie was also unsure and even said, "I don't know, I'm not sure," when confronted with the boy. He certainly looked like her lost child, but the strange way he reacted to her made her question his identity. Furthermore, when he saw little Alonzo, there was no recognition. Public opinion was swayed further by conflicting reports in which some claimed that the boy had recognized his mother and his brother. Either way, the next day, Leslie spent time with the boy again and was able to bathe him during their time together. Seeing him undressed, the doubts disappeared, and Leslie declared joyously that he was her boy, before fainting clean away. Death penalty. Unfortunately for Walters, kidnapping was classed as a capital offense, and he faced life in prison or even the death penalty, as reported in the newspapers at the time. W.C. Walters, the man charged with the crime, may be hanged under the Louisiana statute. The boy had been tramping with the man for some little time before he was picked up, but he has made a favorable impression on the Mississippi authorities, who are making a thorough investigation. The Dunbars say they have identified the child by marks on his body, and they hope that the environment of their home will reawaken some memories in his mind by which they will be more certain. Walters continued to protest his innocence, and in a letter which he penned to the Dunbars from his cell, he wrote, "I know by now you have decided. "You are wrong. It is likely I will lose my life on account of that, and if I do, the great God will hold you accountable." He further wrote, "It seems I must suffer now for an imaginary sin or crime that has never been committed. Living, I yield to no spirit, but the God spirit and the sweet music of the soul, such as is made from the harps of angels. Dying, I can look up through the ethereal blue of heaven, thank God, and say my conscience is clear. The heartstrings of weeping mothers bind not my withering limbs, and the crime of kidnapping stains not my humble threshold door." He begged the Dunbars to send for Julia Anderson so he could prove his innocence once and for all. Julia Anderson. According to William Walters, Julia Anderson had given him permission to take her son Bruce with him, although she claimed that it was only meant to be for a few days, telling reporters that she hadn't actually seen her son for 15 months. A New Orleans newspaper made the arrangements for Julia to travel to Opelousas to see the boy for herself. She was on a wrong footing from the start, though, as the town had already decided that the boy was Bobby Dunbar, and had even had him brought home to a hero's welcome on a fire engine which was covered in flowers. Julia was, without a doubt, delighted at the prospect of being reunited with her son. But the boy reacted in much the same way as he had to Leslie Dunbar. Since being brought to Opelousas, though, the child had received extravagant gifts, including a pony and a brand new bicycle, so it's little wonder that he was thoroughly confused. 15 months is a long time to be away from a child, even longer than the Dunbars, and children of such a tender age can change dramatically in that time span. Nevertheless, after initial uncertainty, Julia said that she knew in her mother's heart that the boy was her son, Bruce. While the townsfolk had readily accepted Leslie's uncertainty over the validity of her son's identity, however, they were not prepared to extend the same grace to Julia, a woman of low social standing and loose morals, claiming that having 3 children by 2 different men, outside of marriage, was akin to prostitution. The poor woman was vilified by the press, called naive and illiterate, and even wrongly blamed for the sudden death of one baby while another was given up for adoption. Julia Anderson had no money to fight the courts, and probably even less mental strength to fight the ocean of hatred she received in the Dunbars' hometown, and it was declared by the authorities that the boy was indeed Bobby Dunbar. Julia returned home alone, and William Walters was sentenced to life in prison, narrowly escaping the death penalty following a conviction for kidnapping. 2 years later, William Walters' attorney lodged an appeal on behalf of his client. In a strange turn of events, the courts decided not to try him again due to the costs involved in the first trial. Having escaped the death penalty the first time around, William Walters then escaped serving the rest of his life behind bars and was released just 2 years into his sentence. For the rest of his life, until his death 30 years later from blood poisoning, William Walters maintained his innocence. The court of public opinion, however, continued to believe that he was guilty, and he died having never been cleared of the alleged crime, a crime he vehemently denied. The aftermath. Life was kinder to Julia Anderson. While she was never reunited with her lost son, she did settle down in Poplarville, Mississippi, where the people who had known both William Walters and his young companion welcomed her with open arms. Marriage followed, as well as 7 more children, and Julia went on to work as a community nurse and midwife, and was even the founder of a church after finding solace in God. While her life was said to be happy, Julie never stopped mourning her little boy, Bruce, and would often talk about how he was kidnapped by the Dunbars. Her only comfort was the fact that her little boy had been given a better lifestyle than the one she could have given him, and would live the rest of his life in relative luxury. When she died on February 1st, 1940, Julia went to her grave without ever seeing her son again. Although not much is known about Bobby Dunbar's life following the events surrounding his disappearance and subsequent reappearance, he was known to have married a woman named Marjorie Byers, with whom he had 4 children before his death in 1966. Investigation. The case had fascinated people for decades, but probably none more so than one of Bobby's own granddaughters, Margaret Dunbar Cartwright, and more than 30 years after her grandfather's death, she began to investigate the case herself. The more she pored over newspaper articles and case notes from William Walters, defense attorney, the more the idea grew that perhaps she wasn't a Dunbar at all. She even conducted interviews with Julia Anderson's children. As her passion for the truth grew, her husband even gifted her a card for the Library of Congress so she could spend her days reading and researching the case. While the Dunbar family was no stranger to the story, it was only during her research that Margaret began seeing the characters as real people, in particular the woman who claimed that Bobby Dunbar was, in fact, her own son, Bruce Anderson. In an interview with This American Life, Margaret said, "Her statement in an affidavit struck me as a very truthful statement. This woman was telling truth. She did have a son, and my heart hurts for Julia at this point, believing that this boy is her son. You know, it's really awkward because Leslie and Julia are in the same position. They're both missing children." As Julia came more and more to life, Margaret found many of the newspaper articles written about her to be highly distasteful. Julia had also lost a son, yet an article entitled "Julia Has Forgotten" by Jerome G. Beatty of the New Orleans Item read, "Her long journey had been in vain. She had not seen her son since February of 1912, and she had forgotten him. Animals don't forget, but this big, coarse countrywoman, several times a mother, she forgot. She cared little for her young. Children were only regrettable incidents in her life." The article went on. "She hopes her son isn't dead, just as she hopes that the cotton crop will be good this year. Of true mother love, she has none." The investigation really gained traction when Margaret stumbled across the name Julia Anderson on an online genealogy site. The entry read, "Julia had a son from her first marriage named Bruce, who was kidnapped from North Carolina when he was 6 years old and taken to Louisiana. She tried to get him back, but the people that kidnapped him won him in court and changed his name to Bobby Dunbar." It dawned on Margaret that perhaps the truth might be different to what she had been led to believe. So in 2000, Bobby Dunbar's granddaughter went to meet two of Julia's children, Hollis Rawls and Jewel Tarver, along with Linda Tarver, the daughter of Jewel and granddaughter of Julia Anderson. It was during these meetings that Margaret learned a very different version of events. Julia's children had been brought up hearing stories of how the Dunbars had kidnapped her son, Bruce. They also painted a picture of Julia that conflicted greatly with the slurs she had been subjected to in the press during the original investigation, including that of being an illiterate. According to Linda, Julia loved reading and would often read to the children in the family, first from books by Zane Grey, and then, having become a Christian, from the Bible. But Bruce was never far from his mother's mind. Holly remembered, she never forgot it, never ever forgot the boy, and she'd always, once in a while, bring it up and what the boy looked like, and she'd take a while to tell it, you know, about he did so and this, that, and the other, you know, and if it had been possible for her to have got the child legally back or anything, she would have done it, if possible. She would have. She loved the child. She loved Bruce. She sure did. Did Bobby suspect? It seems that not everybody believed the Dunbar's story, including Bobby himself. Hollis told Margaret a story about an ordinary day when he was in his 20s and working at an ice plant in Poplarville. A stranger came in and began talking to Hollis before finally admitting that he was Bobby Dunbar. Even when customers disturbed their conversation, Bobby waited to continue talking with Hollis before finally leaving when Hollis had to work. But 30 minutes after he left, it dawned on me what I had done. Here was a man that I'd been looking for 20, almost 30, 20-something years anyhow, and Mother had been telling me about. Here he is, looking me straight in the eye, and I didn't do nothing about trying to find out more about this situation. But I didn't. I just didn't, and I regret that. According to Jewel, Bobby visited her too when a man entered the service station that she ran with her husband and made small talk with her for around an hour before leaving without introducing himself. Jewel remembers, "After he left then and I got to thinking about it, I said, 'That is who I believe he was, Bobby.'" Margaret was unsure whether to believe the stories, until, that is, she recounted them to her uncle Gerald, Bobby's youngest son. He had a story of his own. It would have been 1963, so I would have been 13 years old, right? We were coming back from a trip, my brother's wedding in Ohio, in Cincinnati, and on the way back we went through Mississippi, and I remember my dad pointing. He says, "Those were the people that they came to pick me up from." And he asked, he said, "Should I stop?" And my mother sort of responded, "If you think you should." And so they did. We stopped, then we went into the store, and so we stayed there for maybe 30 minutes or so, and he came back and we left. DNA. Stories continued to be exchanged between the two families until the idea of DNA testing was tentatively introduced in 2004. It was agreed that Bobby Dunbar's oldest son, Bob Dunbar Jr., would be tested, along with Alonzo Dunbar's son, David. It was not a match. Bobby Dunbar was not a Dunbar at all. The results caused a massive rift in the Dunbar family, but for Julia Anderson's family, it came as a relief. Their mother had been vindicated. Of course, the news came too late for Julia to know that her son had been alive all along. William Walter's family also celebrated the news because it exonerated him from the kidnapping accusations which had followed him to his grave. Percy and Leslie. Despite their victory in having their supposed son returned, life was not happy for the Dunbars. When Bobby was 12 and Alonzo was 10, their parents divorced, with Leslie leaving Bobby and Alonzo with Percy while she moved to New Orleans. In the same year, on the 8th anniversary of Bobby's disappearance, Percy severely beat and stabbed a man in Florida, an attack that was also cited in the divorce papers, along with multiple claims of adultery, which he denied. However, court papers came to light which listed arrests for adultery and cohabitation, proving Leslie's accusations correct. So, if Bobby Dunbar was in fact Bruce Anderson, what happened to the little boy who disappeared at Swayze Lake? It was a cover-up. In a letter written to the granddaughter who looked after her as she aged, Leslie wrote, "For Elizabeth Dunbar to read after my death, so she may know why I stayed in my shell of grief." But what was her shell of grief all about? Some have speculated that both Percy and Leslie knew that little Bobby had lost his life that day at the lake, and when Bruce Anderson turned up, they seized the opportunity to wipe the slate clean and forget that their son had died. After all, the boys did look alike and could easily be passed off as one and the same. Had Leslie been negligent as she prepared lunch and not watched her 4-year-old as closely as she should have, in which case she would have lived with that guilt all her life, knowing that the boy she had raised was not her son after all. In addition, if she knew that Bobby was not her own son, she would have had to accept the fact that she had stolen another child from his own mother's arms, something which must surely rest heavy on a mother's heart. He was killed by Paul Mitzi. Not much has been written about Paul Mitzi, the family friend who was the last person to see Bobby before he disappeared. Did Paul kill Bobby, either intentionally or accidentally, then pretend to his parents that he had no idea what happened? As an adult, Paul Mitzi was supposed to be the responsible adult, and it seems incredible that he could return from the walk not knowing where a 4-year-old in his care had gone. It's hard to know whether Paul was a person of interest or not, but if anyone had any answers as to what had happened to the child, it would surely be the man who had been with him when he disappeared. It seems credible that Bobby could have fallen into the lake while in Paul Mitzi's care, who then denied all knowledge to protect himself from accusation. He was kidnapped. A short while after Bobby disappeared, his hat was found some distance away from the lake. This led to many speculating that he had been snatched and taken away. During the search, the party had encountered people along the local tracks, so it would have been entirely possible for a stranger to pick up the boy and hurry away without being seen in the heavily wooded area. One of Bobby's shoes was also found during the search. Could it have fallen off during a kidnapping? He was eaten by alligators. Despite the grand name, Swayze Lake was actually little more than a swamp, and as such was home to plenty of wildlife, including alligators. Had Bobby Dunbar simply slipped into the water and been eaten by one of them? During the search, several gators had been captured and cut open to search for human remains, but none were found. That's not to say that every alligator was caught and killed, though, so the culprit may well have evaded capture and not given up its secret. Was he taken away by boat? Several people reported seeing a strange man sitting in a boat on the lake while the family enjoyed their break. With just a couple of footprints, which may or may not have belonged to Bobby, could a stranger have come ashore, snatched the child, and then rowed him away, never to be seen again? While nobody will ever know what really happened to the angelic-looking Bobby Dunbar, given the location, it seems most likely that the little boy simply fell into the water and either drowned or was eaten by alligators. It's true that the bottom of the lake was dredged and even blown up in an attempt to bring evidence to the surface. Divers certainly found no evidence of the child. But in a dark and murky lake filled with alligators, there would surely have been many places that could have been missed. It's true that it can take an excess of 3 weeks for an alligator to fully digest human bones, but perhaps the gator responsible for poor Bobby Dunbar's surmise had satisfied its appetite and was lying low until hunger struck it again. Being cold-blooded animals, they don't have to eat very often, so as gruesome as it seems, this seems the most plausible theory as to what most likely happened to little Bobby Dunbar.